Okay, thanks, Mike. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar on the Illinois Shines 2023 Annual Report and Delivery Year REC evaluation process. So we will go ahead and get started by introducing today's presenters. My name is Julie Hurwitz. I'm with Energy Solutions, and I am the large DG sector strategist. I'm also happy to be joined today by Keely Weiss, Operations Manager of Energy Solutions, and David Beavers, founder and principal of SunSD Energy Catalysts. I'll ask both Keely and David to introduce themselves more fully when they present today. Before we review today's agenda, I'd also like to share a few housekeeping items. So everyone is going to be muted during the presentation. If you have ask during the webinar, please use possible. Make sure to press the Q&A button and not the chat box. We will leave time to answer as many questions as we can verbally at the end of today's presentation, and a video recording of the webinar, presentation slides, and post-webinar Q&A will be published on the program website following the meeting. For today's agenda, we will provide an annual report overview. We will share information on the REC performance evaluation, community solar parameters evaluation, and the drawdown process. And finally, we'll leave time for questions at the end. So now we'll move on to the annual report overview, which will be presented by Keely Weiss. So I'll hand it over to you, Keely.
Thanks, Julie. Hi, everyone. As Julie mentioned, my name is Keely Weiss, and I'm a senior project manager here at Energy Solutions. So I'll just be reviewing a few slides with some overview information about the annual report. So first off, what is the annual report? Each year in July, approved vendors are required to submit an annual report. And the primary purpose of the annual report is to verify that RECs are being delivered as required, but there's other information reviewed as well. The report includes these 8 main categories of information here on the slide. So first, the RECs delivered by each system, the status of systems that have been approved but not yet energized systems that have not delivered RECs, subscriber information for community solar projects, the balance of collateral held by each utility, a summary of requests for REC obligation, suspension, reduction, or elimination, information on consumer complaints received, and workforce demographic information. So the first 4 items here are actually reports that the program administrator will create or calculate and provide to approved vendors to review during the annual report. And then items 5 through 8 will be provided and reported directly from the approved vendor to the program administrator in the annual report form. Next slide, please. All right. Excuse me. So the annual report will open on July 1st this year, and approved vendors will have through July 17th to respond. Similar to last year, the annual report will utilize a combination of SharePoint and Microsoft Form. Approved vendors will need access to their SharePoint folders to review the 4 reports that I just mentioned on the previous slide, and then confirmation on report accuracy or any information on discrepancies that are found, as well as responses on the additional information that we're requesting, will be collected via the Microsoft form. We'll be sharing more information on SharePoint access in the next couple of weeks, just to ensure that all approved vendors have access to SharePoint in advance of the annual report. But it's the same folder that we've been using since the annual report last year and for ongoing program activities such as REC invoicing and sharing Schedule Bs. So if you already have access to that folder, you should be good to go. We will also provide confirmations and reminders to approved vendors throughout the annual report response period on the status of submissions. And then finally here, I just want to highlight that non-submission of the annual report is an event of default. This may result in the removal of all projects from the contract, return of any payments received, and may also result in disciplinary action against the approved vendor. So please, please make sure that you prioritize this requirement of the rec contract and submit a response during the report window, but no later than July 17th. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so these next couple slides just provide an overview of some critical dates, coming soon and through the annual report timeline. So May 31st is the end of the 2022 to 2023 delivery year, which kind of marks the end of the data that we're looking at for this year's annual report. So the first deadline to be aware of is May 31st. We want to make sure that any biannual reports are submitted by approved vendors. So if this applies to you, if you have systems that are due for a biannual report or a system status update, we've already sent you an email directly with further instructions. May 31st is also the last day to have any rec transfers be completed. So recs count based on the transfer date, not the generation date. And note that it may take up to 7 days for the data to process in GATS. And then once the rec is created, it needs to be transferred successfully by May 31st to count toward this delivery year. So please endeavor to have all available generation data uploaded at least 7 days before the end of the delivery year, which is actually by May 24th. MRETs is almost instantaneous, but approved vendors are still advised to act early. And then the last reminder here about rec deliveries is that anything that gets transferred after the cutoff for this delivery year, so May 31st, will count toward next year's delivery year and annual report. The final timeline or critical date to mention is June 10th, which is the deadline to provide community solar subscriber updates. And again, if this applies to you, we've already sent out a direct email with further instructions. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so just a continuation of the timeline here. So I do want to just call out, with the exception of the first date here, all of these dates are called out in the rec contract. So we have to abide by them and cannot allow for extensions. So just kind of walking through this timeline, we're going to release a step-by-step guide on filling out the annual report on June 16th. And then on July 1st, the annual report response period begins. So this is when you'll get access to actually review those reports in SharePoint, access to the Microsoft form to begin submitting your annual report response. And then you'll have through July 17th to submit your annual report. And again, just a reminder that non-submission of the annual report is an event of default. So just make sure to get that in by July 17th. Then once the annual report response period closes, the cure period begins. So on July 18th, the program administrator will begin reviewing all of the responses and following up with approved vendors on any discrepancies and any other information that may be needed. October 1st is the last day for the program administrator to inform approved vendors of any discrepancies. And then October 13th is when annual reports are finalized. So after that date, there can be no additional modifications to submissions. November 15th is the date that the program administrator will provide any collateral adjustment calculations to the contracting utilities. And then subsequently, the contracting utilities will be reaching out to communicate any collateral drawdowns. And we'll be speaking more about that process in the coming slides. So with that, that wraps up the annual report overview and timeline. So I will be passing it on to Dave to discuss rec performance evaluation.
Hello, everybody. This is Dave Beavers, and I've been working on some of the processes for like rec invoicing and some of its performance evaluation and such. So that's kind of my role with the team. Next slide, please. So the good news for vendors, what we're going to go through here, you don't have to do any calculations or evaluation itself. That will be the administrator, but to the extent you want to peer in, see what's getting done. That's what these slides will contain. So just a word of caution, this is only for the 219 contract, and that's the only ones we're going to work with this year. So, you know, don't apply that to other contracts in the future. There are some differences there, so just a little word of caution. We also, key point is evaluations are performed across a portfolio of designated systems, you know, or per contract. So if there are any drawdowns or such, it's over a portfolio. It's not over a single system. And just for trying to simplify this and you know, maybe show more than tell. I was using a hypothetical, you know, a contract with 4 large DG and 2 community solar projects we'll be using. Next slide, please. So anyways, you know, backing up, you know, what's the purpose of all of this? You know, why are we going through it? Well, if you think about the contracts, you know, there's payments for the RECs that are upfront. I mean, with the small DG, it's all upfront, right? It's a lump sum of 100%. But the RECs are supposed to be delivered over 15 years. So there's really no natural economic incentive to deliver RECs once you got your money, right? So this is kind of a leverage, I guess, if you say. And there's 2 points. There's REC performance, that's the REC deliveries over 15 years. And for community solar projects, there's also, excuse me, an evaluation pertaining to, excuse me, subscriber levels. Next slide, please. So the roles, and you know, Keely talked about the first 2 here. So the first part is, you know, you get your generation data in, so you get your RECs delivered for the year. That'll make the process better. And then there will be, you know, maybe possibly some back and forth to make sure everything's accurate in those reports. Then the program administrator takes over and we actually do these evaluations and calculate drawdowns and such. And then we hand off the information to the utilities, particularly for any drawdowns that they implement them. So that's the rules. Next slide, please. All right, so stepping into the kind of first of the evaluations, a REC performance evaluation. So just a bit of an overview. You can kind of break it down into 4 steps. And the first step is just identify, you know, which of the designated systems will need to undergo an evaluation. Second step is some basic math to do, you know, a rolling 3-year average of deliveries. Excuse me. One little caveat for community solar we'll get into in a second. Then, you know, basically taking the difference of the 3-year rolling average with what was expected for REC deliveries and see if there's a surplus or shortfall. And then with that information, you know, across the contract, assign a surplus to the shortfalls or calculated drawdown. And so if you want to see this, an example of this, Exhibit G in the 219 REC contract as a good example also. Next slide, please. Okay, so step 1, you know, which of the designated systems are required to undergo an evaluation? So if you start with the on the left with the energization date, right, that can happen any time of the year. So you run up to your June 1st, and then you count 3 full delivery years from there. So there's a couple of annual reports along the way. And then when you get to your 3rd annual report, that should start the evaluation process, right? And so get the data in the annual report and make sure it's all in good shape, and we start the evaluation. So this year we expect around 7,000 designated systems will be required to do an evaluation. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a simple step. You just calculating a 3-year rolling average. So, and this is where I'm bringing in the example contract is 6 systems, 4 large DG and 2 community solar. And you see across the top there, just delivery year 1, 2, and 3, and that's the RECs delivered. This is all just numbers I made up. They're just for hypothetical purposes. And then we just take the average, right? So that's what we mean by the rolling 3-year average. It's that average of the 3 delivery years. So there is an exception for community solar in the during the first kind of ever evaluation, there's an option where you can take the average of the last 2 years of the 3 years as opposed to the all 3 years. And if it's better for you. And so in this hypothetical here, you can see taking the last 2 years on number 5 gives us a little bit better 3-year average. So that's the number we would use. Okay, next step, please. Next slide. Okay, so the next step, you can see starting from the left in the columns, I added the rolling 3-year average from the last slide. And now we add the expected rec quantity. That will come from the Schedule B. It's associated with each system. There's a delivery schedule. And mostly for this year, for most of these systems, it's going to be the 4th delivery year, because that's a partial year plus 3 delivery years. So that's the number that'll be used for most of these designated systems to compare against. Okay, and then we just do some simple subtraction. So for number 1, it's break even. There's no rec surplus. There's no shortfall. Number 2, it's 103 minus 100, so we get a rec surplus of 3. You can kind of see going down the road. And so number 3, you know, we actually have a lower 3-year average than the expected, so we get a shortfall of 7. And then you can see at the bottom we total those up. The rec surplus will be key in the next step. Next slide, please. Okay, and this is where it gets a little complicated. And so I took out systems 1, 2, 4, and 5 because they had rec surpluses, and just to make this simpler, because we don't have to worry about those. But for the systems that had a shortfall, we need to apply the surplus. And the rule on that is you apply first to the system with the lowest rec price. So here we have 2 systems, 3 and 6, you know, with a shortfall. And number 3 with the rec price is 70 has the lowest price. So we go for that first. We take our 53 recs and we, you know, pull out 7 and apply it to that system. So you can see the net rec shortfall is 0. And therefore the drawdown payment for that system is also 0. So go down to 6, there's a rec shortfall of 70. We have 46 surplus left, and we apply that, and we come up with a rec shortfall of 24. So the way they calculate the drawdown is real simple. You take that 24 minus rec price of 80, and that's the drawdown. One thing to note, I don't show it here, but in future years, if there's a rec surplus from 1 year, it can roll into the next. And so that 53 or rec surplus there, if we had something from last year to add to it, we'd have more of the surplus to assign. So anyways, going forward, that could be something to take account of. Next slide, please. All right, switching over to the community solar parameters evaluation. And of course, this only applies to community solar. Next slide, please. All right, so the overview, again, we got to identify which of the community solar projects need to undergo an evaluation. And then there's a step, we'll ask kind of 2 questions to see if a drawdown is needed. And then if a drawdown is needed, we'll do the calculation and see what that drawdown should be. This follows contract section 6E if you want to read it for yourself. Next slide, please. Okay, so similar to the rec evaluation, there's a timeline here. Again, we have that energization date, but this time we run on quarters. And this is similar if you're familiar with the adjustment periods, the 4 adjustment quarters under community solar. This should be familiar. And so we get to the 4th quarterly report. That's the last and final report. And that's where numbers such as a small subscriber percentages and the subscriber percentages get locked in. We have 1 full delivery year. Again, that's June through May. And then we end up at the annual report and taking the data, we start to evaluate. So this year we expect about 32 community solar projects will be in the queue for evaluation. Next slide, please. Okay, and this gets a little complicated. But again, vendors do not have to do this, but just so you understand what's going on behind the curtain. So there's basically two questions that could be asked to see if a drawdown is needed. And the first is it pertains to what's called a solar subscription mix, or you can think of a small subscriber percent, if that's easier. So was that maintained? That was maintained from the fourth quarter report, right? If it drops, there may be an issue that may require a drawdown. So two examples here. For 5, it did drop, but it dropped from 80 to 77. Now, there's no drawdown required. It passes the test because it didn't drop below 75%. And in the 219 contract for that price adder for community solar, if you recall, there are bins, 25, 50, and 75. So as long as you don't drop below a bend, if you're in the fourth quarter, in this case at 80, and you drop to 77, that's fine. Or if you're, say, at 60% and you stay above 50, you're fine too. But you got to stay in that bend. However, for number 6, they dropped from 77% to 73. So they drop below 75, and that's going to kick in a drawdown. So question B, and this pertains to the subscriber percent, again, was that level shown in the fourth quarter report maintained? Okay, and again here, there are some provisions to keep in mind. So in example number 5, we dropped from 98 in the fourth quarter to 92. So that is a drop, but however, we stayed above 90%. And so per the contract, anything above 90% kind of, it gets a pass. There won't be any drawdown. If it drops below 90, like we have in number 6, 92 to 85, then we get into the drawdown consideration. So anyways, to pass the test, you have to say yes to both of these, like number 5 did. And if you have either case, either A or B, where you say no, then you have a drawdown. In this case of 6, we have both drawdowns. Next slide, please. Okay, and the calculation gets a bit involved, so I'll just quickly go through it. Again, you don't have to do it. So in this case, in this hypothetical, so it's number 6, number 5 was clear, so we don't have to do anything for it, right? We drop from 77 to below 75, and that means that adder, that was a part of the price, drops. In this case, that drops the price from 64 to 53. Then if we go down to the system contract maximum rec quantity, sorry, there's a typo though, it's rec, not red. Then we drop from 92 to 85. Okay, and that means there was less recs delivered for the subscriber percent. So anyways, you can run through this math and you get to delay your contracted payment. So as of the fourth quarterly report, that was $741,000. And that's what the direct payment was on an annual basis. And however, if it's adjusted for these new numbers, for these new small subscriber levels, it's $565,000. And so the difference is a drawdown. All right, next slide, please. So anyways, we put these two together, the rec performance evaluation and the community solar parameters, and you get a total. And also, if you can also have a surplus, as we discussed, for rec performance evaluation. In this example, there is no surplus, and this would be the drawdown, mainly due to the community solar, obviously. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we'll talk about the process quickly. So we got our numbers, they go to the utility, and so next slide, please. Okay, so the evaluation is complete. This has to be done by November 15th, and this information goes to the utility. So the utility informs the vendor of the aggregate drawdown payment via written notice. And there's a kind of qualification. If that drawdown is bigger than the collateral, the performance assurance, then the seller needs to add extra money to that collateral. within 10 business days. And this is all in the contract, by the way, just if you want to read it yourself. However, there is a drawdown threshold. If that value of the drawdown is less than 5,000, then basically the utility will just roll that into next year. They won't have a drawdown that year. And then at the end of that, the top off of the collateral per the contract, within 90 days, the collateral has to be topped off. And again, that would be working through your utility. Next slide, please. Okay. So anyways, just keep some things to keep in mind for not this year, but the following year, 2024. So if you have a designated system that had a tough year, maybe we'll shut down half the time. So it created quite a shortfall. Once surplus RECs or the drawdown is paid on it, it basically zeroes out. So it won't impact the 3-year rolling average for the 2024. So kind of once it's accounted for, there's no double jeopardy on it. Next slide, please. Also, if you have a designated system that for whatever reason, long term it's not going to be performing well, it's not just a short term issue. You can adjust the expectations, the REC delivery expectations in the contract. That's section 6F. And it starts with contacting the utility. And on the good side, good news, if you're doing really well and you're rolling surplus RECs over every year, at the end of the contract, and well, this is 15 years down the road, so it's a while, but you can get a refund on any surplus RECs at the end of 15 years. Next slide. So I think, anyways, just some references and resources here about the contract and the guidebook and such, and for assistance. With that, I'll turn it over.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, so just to reiterate, to wrap up, we want to direct your attention to the resources page on the program website, where you can find the REC contracts, including the 2019 contract referenced in this presentation. You can also find the program guidebook and a reminder that the current version is the October 18th, 2022 version. Also, we will be providing stakeholders an updated annual report guide, which will be published on June 16th, 2023. So please look out for that, as it should answer a lot of questions on this process. Stakeholders are also always encouraged to contact the program admin with questions as shown on this slide, or by joining us at an upcoming office hour session, which are outlined in the weekly announcements. So thank you again to our presenters, and we will move on to questions.
Thank you, Julie. I do want to thank our presenters today, including Julie Hurwitz and Keely Weiss of Energy Solutions and Dave Beavers of Sunesti Energy Catalysts. Thank you for the rich presentation and detailed information. We would love to take some questions. I'm going to read one that's been answered, and we have at least one more. It's our honor and privilege to let you know also that we're joined today by Audrey Steinbach, Senior Program Manager of Illinois Shines of the Illinois Power Agency, as well as Kelly Turner, the Interim Chief Legal Counsel. So while they didn't present, they're here to assist if they can. And with that, I want to recap one question that's been answered already by Audrey. Thank you. The question was, the REC price used is based on what is assigned to the contract, correct? And the response was yes. The REC price for a system is set based on the available price when the application is submitted to the program. And this is the REC price that is used for the project on the REC contract and throughout the lifetime of the system in the program. So that was answered live. We have another question for community solar projects. How are delivered REC values compared to expected values when there have been some quarters with less than 100% full of community solar subscribers? Are the values compared to the total of the percentage full of CS for each quarter? Want to ask which of our panelists might be interested to answer that if I could. So Keely or Dave or the agency would one of you be interested to respond?
Sure, this is Dave. I mean, I think to allow an apples to apples comparison, the subscriber levels would have to be considered, right, on the expected delivery.
Okay, thank you, Dave. A next question, are there expected to be any major differences in the annual report requirements compared to last year, particularly details on the workforce demographic information? That's something I can direct to the panel and perhaps the program administrator or the agency.
Yeah, Mike, this is Kelly Turner from the IPA. I believe that the workforce demographic information and geographic information that's collected on the annual report is going to stay the same this year. There might be some minor tweaks in the wording. Maybe Audrey knows that, but it's going to be the same information will be collected again this year.
That's correct.
Great. Thank you, Kelly and Audrey. Okay, I've got another question here. Could you please restate the cutoff for GATS generation reporting at end of energy year? Would there be an issue if we are not able to report maize production until mid-June? Audrey, it looks like you may have been in the midst of answering that. Since I've read it aloud, could I ask you to share it verbally rather than in writing?
Yeah, so I believe this was on an earlier slide, but all RECs that are going to be counted in the delivery year that is covered by this annual report must be transferred in the REC tracking system that the project has a standing order in by May 31st. So that is the cutoff date. So if there are not RECs that are transferred in the tracking system by May 31st, then those RECs will be counted in the next year, the next delivery year. And Keely or David can correct me if I am wrong in any of that.
Nope, that's all correct, Audrey.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Audrey, and thank you, Keely. Next question, if I can direct to the panel. For large DG projects, can you expand on how surplus production RECs are handled and how those may transfer to future years?
I guess I'll take that. There's a kind of a rollover account. And so, I mean, every year, if you have surplus RECs every year, you just kind of keep rolling them over and that account builds up, which can be used if you have a bad year or at the end of 15 years, there's a refund option.
Great. Thank you so much, Dave. I'm going to apologize if I have missed this one, but I don't think I've read it aloud yet. Could you please restate the cutoff for GATS generation reporting at end of energy year? Would there be an issue if we are not able to report maize production until mid-June?
Sorry, Mike, that's the one that I just answered, but this is really important, so I can say it again.
I'm so sorry.
And no, that's okay. And that's the slide that's showing now. Yeah, the RECs that are counted for this delivery year must be transferred within this delivery year. So it's about the transferring of the RECs in the REC tracking system.
Great, thank you. Bears repeating. Thank you, Audrey. And I've got one more question in the queue right now. How do we ensure that GATS uploaded RECs have been delivered?
I'm not sure if Keely might have more experience with this than me, but I believe that if you have your GATS account and you have your standing orders set up for each of your systems, that you should be able to log in there and kind of check on your REC deliveries and make sure that everything's looking good there. I obviously play a different role as the program manager, so I'm not going into GATS and checking on specific systems. So I'm not sure exactly the interface or how this looks, to be honest.
Yeah, just tagging on to what Audrey said. So the standing order should be doing that automatically for you. But if you need additional assistance, you can reach out to us via email and we can kind of look into some specific systems and just make sure that we can see the REC transfers on our side.
Great. Thank you, Audrey and Keely. That exhausts the open questions that we have. We do have a little more time if anybody has some additional questions, or as Keely has invited, and which you can see on the screen here, you're welcome to join the program administrator at office hours, which are publicized in each week's announcement, as well as using the contact information shared on the screen. And we'll get those questions routed accordingly. We'll also be publishing a Q&A from today's session. Not seeing any other questions coming in right now. Give it just another moment, but I also want to invite if our speakers and presenters have any closing thoughts that they want to add, since we are caught up on Q&A. So I'll ask the program administrator team and our partner Dave Beavers, as well as the agency, if there are any additional comments to be added.
This is Audrey. I just want to reiterate, it's really important that folks are checking their GATS or MREX accounts and kind of like making sure that the rec deliveries that are there are the rec deliveries that you were expecting out of a project, just because there has been some technology shifts from I think 3G to 5G that's been causing some issues with systems being able to talk to the rec registries. So just making sure that even if you have the standing order set up and you're expecting things to just be working automatically, that you just do a double check, make sure that everything's as expected before it's kind of too late in the game.
Great. Thank you, Audrey. Very important. And to that, I'll add, if there's anybody on your team that need to be added via emails to receive some of the communications around annual reports or other items, please contact us as well. But thank you for that critical detail, Audrey. I think we have gotten through all the questions, which again, we'll publish, and should any more come in, we're happy to take them. Kelly, Dave, Keely, or Julie, any further comments that you'd like to make before we conclude today's presentation?
Not for me, Mike. Thank you.
Okay, well, I want to thank all of our participating entities who have joined today. We're grateful for your attendance and a chance to share this information. As mentioned, we want to support you going forward and have office hours and upcoming annual report guide you can expect on June 16th, and more information and announcements. Thank you for your contributions to make the program stronger, and thank you for your time today. We'll get these materials posted, and we thank you.